and we'll provide a link to the DOHVE website at the end of the webinar. Also, we're muting all the lines during the presentation. After the presentation, we'll unmute the lines so that participants may ask questions during the question and answer portion of the webinar. And you may save your questions until after the presentation, or you can type them into the Q&A box on the webinar screen, and we'll address all the questions at the end. So now a few words about today's webinar. Today's webinar is going to focus on process mapping as a CQI tool. We recognize that grantees are at different stages of the quality improvement process, and grantees have developed CQI plans and are in the midst of carrying out their QI processes. Some are in the early stages and are still formulating a plan for CQI for their home visiting program. Regardless of where grantees are in the process of CQI planning and implementation, process maps can be a useful tool for conceptualizing the quality improvement process and visually representing each step in the process. The purpose of today's presentation is to provide an introduction to process maps, to provide participants with examples of a process map, and to illustrate how process maps can be a valuable tool in a program's quality improvement strategy. Julie Massey is our presenter today. Julie's a quality improvement consultant with Cincinnati Children's Hospital and Every Child Succeeds, and she's also a member of the DOHVE team. As part of the DOHVE team, Julie's provided quality improvement TA to McVie grantees and has worked individually with many grantees on their CQI plan development. So now I'll hand it over to Julie.
Great, thank you, Susan. I'm going to flip through a few screens here. So I just wanted to start everybody off with the objectives today. As Susan outlined, we will be getting a nice overview of process maps as well as a brief introduction into how to develop process maps. And we'll walk through a few examples that are very generic just to get the application concepts, as well as some that can be that have been developed based on a few of the benchmarks. And then we'll also demonstrate how this tool can be valuable in quality improvement, as Susan mentioned. So to get started, I'd like to start off with this quote, which states, "If you can't describe your work as a process, you don't know what you're doing." And this quote is from Deming, who's known for his work in manufacturing and business in Japan. He's best known for the plan, do, check, act cycle, and although the core of his methods were to improve quality and using statistics to detect flaws in a production process, he really developed a broader management philosophy that emphasized problem-solving based on cooperation. When he was going through his quality improvement work, his theories were based on the premise that most defects in products resulted in management shortcomings rather than careless workers, and that inspection after the fact was inferior to designing a process that would produce better quality initially the first time, every time. And so his work has become the basis for many of the theories that we use in quality improvement today. So to get us on the same page, I thought we'd start with a basic definition of quality improvement. Essentially, quality improvement comes from the desire to make things better. It's really a non-punitive way of learning our way into a new system. So at first glance, quality improvement might seem like a lot more work piled onto an already impossible workload. However, if quality improvement can ultimately lessen that workload and allow us to provide more efficient or better home visits for our families, leading to better outcomes, isn't it worth it? So quality improvement really allows us to take the knowledge gained in everyday work and audit functions such as quality assurance activities and focus on taking those results and achieving consistent results that drive these improved outcomes for our families and our programs. So what is a process map? Many times they're called flowcharts, and so I'll use those two terms interchangeably as we go through the webinar today. It is really a generic tool that can be adapted for a wide variety of purposes. However, ultimately, it provides a visual diagram or a picture of the sequence of steps to complete a task. It allows a team to come to agreement on the steps of the process and to examine which of the activities may impact process performance. And so with everyone in the room, it gives everyone the same starting point and highlights which steps ultimately have to be taken to achieve what we're trying to focus on, improvement activities or developing an outcome consistently. And it can also serve as a training aid that gets everyone on the same page and assists in communicating to others how the process is done. The beauty of it being a visual diagram is it shows unexpected complexity or unnecessary loops, which sometimes in quality improvement can be considered waste in the process because we're waiting for something to happen, or again, we just repeat steps that are unnecessary to the actual outcome of the process. It identifies problem areas, as I alluded to, such as waits or delays or confusion, outlines the actual steps versus the ideal flow of the process, provides the opportunity for us to look at the process overall in the visual diagram for simplifying the steps or standardizing how something is done, and encompasses the contributions to the overall product or outcome by a variety of roles and individuals. Mapping a process simply entails drawing a box for each of the steps and connecting the boxes to show the flow of the work. Keeping process maps simple leads to the best improvement ideas. And there's a variety of ways that process maps can be created, from using simple pen and paper to specialized value stream mapping software. So in today's presentation, we'll highlight a few examples of each. So to get started, we encourage you to take a small team of people and make sure they represent the key individuals or roles that are involved in the process. And start writing each of the steps of the process on a separate card and then review the information to identify the sequence to accomplish the task. So as the slide illustrates in the top corner, you can see that people have started out doing very simple things using sticky notes where different colors of ink represent different things, as well as different colors of the actual sticky notes can represent different things. So it doesn't require a lot of sophistication or a lot of techniques and software and things like that. And when you start doing the process maps and the discussions, brainstorming is a great way to get everybody started with just thinking through their steps and writing them down. We're not worried about drawing it the right way at first. We're more focused on getting that idea and getting everything encompassed on the paper. And then once all the ideas are shared, we'll arrange the activities in the proper sequence. Many of you might be familiar with flowcharts, either in the fact that you've designed them yourselves or you've seen them before. So the trick for a flowchart or a process map is to be at the right level of detail, so not too high or not too low. So in this example, this is tracking referrals that come in to a call center. So essentially there's a lot more that goes on behind the scenes, but if you're trying to make someone familiar with how referrals are processed through to scheduling a home visit, this is a simple diagram that shows that when the referral call comes in, it's referred to a call center. The person on the phone asks if they meet the program criteria, and if yes, they'll forward it to the service provider or the agency, who will then move forward and schedule the home visit. If they do not meet the program criteria, the call center in this case will actually look to see if there's any other local resources that might be beneficial to what the person is looking for, and they'll close the referral and it won't be sent on any farther. So the key when you're developing flowcharts in this case are the specific shapes that are used. Ovals are used to show the boundary for the process, so where it starts and where it stops. And in this case, the referral is received at the top, and the referrals generate either the home visit or they're closed in the system at the bottom in those ovals. Diamonds are used when there's a question to be answered and a decision to be made. So in this case, we're asking if the referral meets program criteria. And if yes, we take one course of action, and if no, we take a different course of action. And then last, we have squares represented on here as action steps, which means something is actually happening as part of the process. So when you're thinking about creating flowcharts, the appropriate level of detail is one thing that you'll want to consider early on. There's no guideline to say you need a lot or a little. It's really as much as you need in order to identify the improvement opportunities. And as we go through here and we start off, we'll give you some guidelines as to what to consider. Additionally, we just focused on the consistent use of symbols. By using diamonds to represent decision points, whenever you see a flowchart or others that you're working with become familiar with flowcharts, you'll know that that's a decision point that leads you down one path or another. Additionally, when you start to see the ovals, you'll know that that's the end or the beginning of a process. So the consistent use of symbols really helps everyone get on the same page and understand what pieces of the process we're focusing on. Additionally, you'll want to consider who the audience is. Are these people that are involved day-to-day in the process and need a little bit level of detail, different than those that are not involved day-to-day and just need more of a high-level piece of the process to understand? And again, the boundaries as to where the process starts and ends are always key, so we know exactly what we're scoping out of the full entire start to finish of how a product or service is delivered. So the first thing we need to do is to get to know our process. And there are some basic steps to get started on evaluating your process. The process map will be a work in progress as you review it and refine it based on the input from individuals responsible for the work, as you do observations, and you identify extra steps or placements of resources. So the first thing we encourage you to do is to develop an aim statement. So again, using process maps and improvement, we always want to know what we're trying to improve and what we're specifically trying to focus on. So in our example of the referral process, it was a very high level from the call center to the agency being assigned. And then from that, we know that there's a multitude of steps in the middle, such as what does the call center person say over the phone? What type of resources do they reference? Do they have a computer system and a database that they have to log things in? So there's a variety of things that will come into play as we observe our processes. So getting everyone to develop a specific aim statement will get you on the right path at the beginning. The next step is we want to observe the process in action. Then we want to take our high-level process map and think about what additional elements needed to be added based on the observation of the process. So if we were observing the call center, what did we notice that we did not include initially? And then what are the opportunities for the process not to be followed, for problems to arise, or steps to be eliminated? So as we think about all of that, we really want to think about how it's all about planning for the right outcome. And to do this, we really need to begin with identifying our aim. So by starting off with thinking about what the problem is that we are trying to solve or what area that we're trying to improve will help us scope and answer the question, what are we really trying to accomplish? How do we know it's a problem? How do we know that it really needs focused attention for improvement? Has it happened consistently, or is it a one-time event? Is it something that could be solved by training and awareness, or is it really a flaw in the process? So if we fix the problem, how will we and everybody else know that it's fixed? So we really want to think about how we know that the change has been made that's resulted in a better process overall. And so when we look at quality improvement, data is really instrumental so we can see the impact of our efforts quantitatively and experience the change qualitatively. So in our aim statement, we really want to think about where we are today and where we'd like to go as a targeted goal by a specific date. So to help illustrate this, I thought we'd walk through a basic example where we are focused on pizza delivery. As the owner of a local pizza restaurant, our goal is to understand what the customer expectations are. And for some reason right now, we're having a problem and difficulty meeting those customer expectations. Specifically, customers are complaining that they're not getting their pizza on time. And so we've called a meeting with our staff to ask for ideas to solve the problem. And so when we started to talk about this with a few colleagues of ours from the manufacturing world, they suggested that we look at our options using improvement techniques. So to begin, we're going to determine how exactly we should start with this. And we know that an aim statement is key. So we've gone through a few edits to get to this point, but we want to start off with saying by June 30th of 2013, 95% of orders will be delivered within 30 minutes of the order being placed. And so this is something that we've been working on for a few months that came to light. And so this is our aim statement, that back in January when these problems started occurring, we gave ourselves 6 months to turn it around. Why this is important to us is because we identified that there's a lot of pizza restaurants in town, and we really want to keep the business of our local customers. And so we know that if we can get our orders delivered within 30 minutes of them being placed, that will make us competitive, but it will also increase our customer satisfaction. And ultimately, again, more satisfied customers equals more orders. So that gives us more opportunities to expand our products or potentially open additional restaurants. So we start off by looking at making our aim a SMART aim. And in the corner of the slide here, you can see that I've spelled out the acronym SMART. And so we want this to be very specific, so it's clearly stated, so everybody knows what we're trying to accomplish. We want it to be measurable, because again, as I mentioned in the other slide, we want within our improvement work to know where we are today and where we'd like to go, and measure it incrementally to make sure we're on the right path with our efforts. We want this to be actionable, so we want it to be something that the team members have direct impact on, generating the improvement and the change in the outcome. We want it to be relevant, so it's aligned with the organization's priorities, and we want to be time-bound, so this doesn't continue on and we don't know that we've accomplished what we've tried to set out and accomplish. So again, we started this in January, so we gave ourselves 6 months to think about how we could impact this. And so by starting in January, it helps us gear up for the summertime season also. So we're trying to be proactive and think about things ahead of time. So now that we've stated our aim, what we'd like to do is see what exactly is happening out there. So one of the most important things that we need to do in the beginning is observe the current process. So go out and walk the process from a customer's perspective. Ask your team members to do it. It's not just about drawing the process as you think it exists, but also seeing and observing the process firsthand. So it's a fact-finding mission. Everyone's in it together for the overall outcome, so it's not an opportunity to point fingers or lay blame as to what's happening. Right now we know that our customers are not happy with us, and we'd like to maintain our customer loyalty. So we need to find out why we're not meeting our goal and figure it out together as a team. So again, we'll list the steps of the process in a non-punitive way. We'll observe the process at different times of the day to verify if something changes in that. Is there a different process that occurs during peak times versus the slower time? Is there something that happens during the day versus what happens during the evening? Do weekends look different than what they look like during the day or during the week? We'll ask a lot of questions. The beauty of quality improvement, again being non-punitive, is that we're all trying to figure out what's happening for the greater good so we can improve things. So we'll ask people how things are done. And many don't think about the steps it takes to accomplish the task from start to finish because they may just have a specific role within it. And sometimes when asked about what happens, many people will talk about the extremes. They'll talk about the best case scenario or the worst case scenario. But what happens the majority of the time? That's really what we want to talk about because we're talking about our processes here and how we can make sure that our pizzas are made consistently and timely every time. So we may have that one time that we had a really big order or that someone was sick and couldn't come in or we had a snowstorm, things that impact us on a unique one-time case basis. So we'll hear about those as we go through our observation, but we really want to know what happens the majority of the time and what is within our control. So once we list out the steps of the process, we'll create our first draft of our high-level process flow diagram. And then we'll want to start thinking about baseline data so we can see what percentage of our pizzas are delivered within 30 minutes of the order being placed now so we know kind of where we should improve to. And then, because we want to get everyone on the same page and really be transparent with what's working and what's not, our plan is to display the data, trend it over time, so everyone knows our efforts are paying off. So process maps become extremely useful in driving improvement when they're simple and visual. They allow everyone to understand them and see the possible ways to do things better. So we really want to be clear about our purpose of the process when we start out. What is the output and the outcome desired by the customer? What are the inputs to the process? Who are our key customers and suppliers? So by starting with a simple process map that everyone can follow and build upon by answering these questions, we'll get to that level of detail that we talked about, and we'll know we'll have it right when we can really start identifying our opportunities for improvement. So our process we've decided to talk about is producing and delivering the pizza. And we know that we've got our customers out there, and our output is delivering pizza, and we want our pizza to taste good, be plenty of cheese, and be received within 30 minutes of when the order is placed. So it's not a good practice for us to rush our pizzas out the door and jeopardize the taste or the quantity of ingredients. So we really need to measure and balance all of these things. There are some other things that we can consider also, such as if we had a problem with ingredients or ovens, that we may want to go down that path. But specifically in this case, our focus is to show that we really need to improve the orders and also thinking about how we can get them out timely and get those delivery drivers back in to send the next order out. So in this example, we've defined the boundaries of our process as to when the time clock starts ticking, when we receive the order, and it ends with the driver returning to the shop. So let's talk about the big picture. We need enough information for the creativity and generating ideas, but also we need to limit the information that we have so we have some concrete guidance as we go through it. So our goal is to start with the high-level process map that consists of somewhere between 4 and 7 steps. So when we think about this, we started with receiving the order. So the minute our phone rings and we pick it up and we collect that order, to getting the ingredients together, baking the pizza, assembling the order, delivering the order, collecting payment from the customer, and returning to the shop. And again, we know that this is all about delivering pizzas, not necessarily the pizzas that we're coming to pick up. We know that within here there are a lot of other process steps that we have not included, such as measuring the ingredients. We know we want a sufficient amount of cheese on there, but we really didn't talk about how much is out there. We know that every pizza we make is going to require us to have a pan available, as well as to make sure that pan is clean. We also need a box to deliver these things in. And then ultimately, we've got some other pieces, such as how well we pay our vendors. So these are all important things, but right now our focus is, again, in producing and delivering the pizzas. So when we hone in on that, it's very easy to do some high-level steps within 4 to 7 steps that represent our full process and don't include all of the external factors overall. So as we talked about, in improvement work, we're really trying to seek usefulness and not perfection. We really want to have a clear and specific operational definition as to what we're trying to focus on. So in order to do that, we really need to measure our improvement. And so this is one key point that I really want to make as you go through your process maps and you think about how this applies to quality improvement, that while all improvement requires a change, all change is not an improvement. So as we think about what that means, we really want to make sure that what we're measuring in the ideas and the things that we test as interventions to drive our success allow us to learn if our change is moving us towards our goal or away from the improvement that we're looking for. So we'll know if we're doing what we're expected to do when our measures are clear and concise and are generated over time to show that we're not jeopardizing anything else. So how will we know our pizzas are getting delivered faster? And how will we know that they're getting delivered faster but are not jeopardizing the outcome, meaning that they're cold pizzas, that they're the wrong pizzas, that our drivers are rushed, or our customer service suffers? So again, we want to make sure that we take all of those factors into consideration when we think about this. So as we talked about, we have to figure out where we are and understand a little bit more of what's going on. So we started this in January, and we were thinking about where we could go with it. And so we started out with some small samples of data that we just collected with our staff, asking them what was going on. So in January, these are considered our process failures. Every time that our pizzas were not delivered on time, we just created a simple tracking to figure out what happened. So our reasons for late pizza deliveries in January were that we had the wrong address, we had the wrong order, we didn't have enough drivers, we had a complex order, the driver was lost, or we were stuck in traffic. So again, you can see that when we started to look at this, our goal is to really understand what happens the majority of the time that either can make or break our process. So we want everyone to understand that this data is key and that we are really focused on improving this. So we'll post this chart in a very public place so again, everyone knows that where we stand today and what our ultimate goal is. So by graphing this out, you can see that we've put the percentage of time on the right at the bottom of the chart to show how many of our pizzas were delivered within our targeted time. And then our target is illustrated at the time at 95%. So January's rate was 65%. So the good news is that we got more than half of our pizzas out on time. So again, this is not something that we want to downplay. We're doing it right 65% of the time. However, the pizza delivery business is a very competitive business, and we need to get it right 95% of the time. Otherwise, we'll be out of business. So this chart is very simple to understand, and our data collection was very simple to understand to help us know where to go next. So now we want to identify and quantify where things went wrong. So note the frequency in which each breakdown occurs, and then note which of the breakdowns create the most serious problems with achieving the desired outcome of the process. So we're looking for common themes. So again, through our process observation and feedback from those involved in the process and using our data, we'll help kind of paint that full picture from start to finish to understand what is happening. And then we can understand where we need to go with our improvement efforts. So this is where I'd like to introduce the concepts of drivers of change. So if you've never experienced this problem before in our pizza delivery business, so we're not exactly sure where we go and how we know what to do next. So we need to ask ourselves just some basic questions. What is the ideal or the evidence-based process that we need to follow? And as we kind of go through this, we'll want to think about what factors are necessary to help us achieve our aim. What is ideal for our project at the moment? There are different strategies if we want to go from a 25% improvement to a 95% improvement, then from 65 to 95. So our goal is to identify kind of the root causes by identifying the categories or drivers of our improvement effort. And this is going to help us get everyone on the same page and build our theory of change. So this links all of our thinking into a cause and effect. If I do this, then this should result. So an intervention is done, and therefore our aim should be show improvement. So based on that, we really want to think about what helps us drive our improvement. What are the top 5 high-level process failures that stand in our way? And so again, we're on a fact-finding mission. We really don't want to assume anything takes place or does not take place. We want to find out what happens the majority of the time. And failures are just as important, if not more important, to our process. So as we're doing our improvement work, it's key to understand that we are not implementing. We are improving, and that requires a certain element of trial and error to figure out what works well. So let's define our drivers. In this case, we had brainstormed ideas with our staff. We had our data, and because we're not an evidence-based type place, we need to validate our ideas. So we're going to use evidence, we're going to use data, as well as observing the process, interviews, and discussions with our team who are directly involved in the process to know that we're on the right focus. So when we looked at our drivers, we noticed that out of our data where things went wrong, we had a lot of opportunity in getting that order recorded accurately the first time. Then we had the opportunities with pizzas needing to be made timely after the order was placed. After the pizzas were ready, we needed the drivers available to deliver them. In order to have the drivers ready to deliver them, we needed their vehicles to be available and fully operational. And then last, once we had done everything which was in the scope of our control, We had to get our drivers to their delivery location efficiently. So when we think about another tool that can be introduced to help us with this, I thought that we would cover the Simplified Failure Mode Effects Analysis. And again, this is another type of process map that will help us think about at a high level where our opportunities lie. So through brainstorming with our team, we identified some reasons of our failure. We collected data so we know how often they occur, and we know and we can rank how critical each possible failure is to its effect on the desired outcome of the process. So from this, we'll think about how we can go from our current process to our newly designed process at the end of this. So this is a diagram that was put together in PowerPoint that we use frequently in our improvement efforts here. And just to give you kind of the high-level description, in the middle in the black boxes is the current process that's listed out. So again, our 4 to 7 steps, how we get from receiving our order to getting the pizza delivered to getting the driver back to the shop to take out the next order. Then at the bottom of this, in the red boxes, is where we're going to list every way that each step can go wrong. Again, this can be done with sticky notes, with pen, with paper. It doesn't have to be done in a PowerPoint technique or template, but this is just an example of how you could do this. And then once we've listed down in the red boxes where things can go wrong, we want to look at the top in the green boxes and think about where improvement strategies might lie. So we took this template to the team, and we started to brainstorm and identify our possible causes for failure. So when we looked at our data to identify the frequency, we could then think about where our themes actually surfaced. And in this case, we had 2 main themes: how we take the order accurately and correctly, and how we deliver the order. So the team decided to think about where things went wrong. So when the orders were coming in over the phone, we had challenges with understanding the callers, recording the addresses, and handling the volume of calls. When it came time to delivering the order, we had difficulty with finding the locations. We had our drivers get lost. Sometimes we had the wrong order and the wrong pizza, and many times they ran out of gas. So when we talked about solutions for these failures, the interventions that we came up with were for receiving the order. We're thinking about how we could create a standardized order form, standardized phone scripts used with the customers, and an automated phone menu. When we thought about how we could look at improving the delivery order process, we thought about collecting information about the delivery location and GPSs for our drivers. So as you can see with this example, we're not trying to solve the full process from start to finish. Our improvement efforts are going to be very focused on specific steps of the process. And through that, we're going to do some small-scale testing. So as I alluded to at the beginning of the process, Deming was the father of the PDCA cycle. So in this example here, this is very similar to the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle, or as we call it also, the Plan, Do, Study, Act, PDSA cycle. So we'd like to generate a number of ideas that involve the representatives from each group that will either be involved in the testing or will be impacted by the change. So we are going to do some small-scale testing, and the key is small scale. We're going to test these ideas enough time to learn if there's something we want to adopt and implement permanently into our process. Again, these are not implementation ideas. We are not rolling this out. We're simply testing it. And some questions that we're going to ask are, what do we want to learn and how will we measure if it's successful? What do we predict will happen? When will we test? We may not want to test when the peak orders for pizzas are coming in or when we have new staff over the phones. We also want to think about where we're going to test. So do we want to do all phone lines, one phone line? If we have multiple sites, in which case in home visiting we have multiple agencies many times, we don't want to necessarily test at all agencies when we're just trying to learn something. So again, thinking about these things and generating the ideas with the people that will be testing them will help us get to the second bullet here, which is identifying which ones are testable. Then we want to think back to the drivers. Which were the levers of change that we really want to make sure we're impacting so we can make sure that our tests are related to that. And then we'll study the results. So we collected our baseline data in January, and February came, and we thought we would start small with looking at our orders and how we could focus on recording them accurately. The ideas that we came up with initially in our brainstorming session were a standardized script to collect information from the customer, standardized order entry form, so that way the individuals making our pizzas will know where to find the requested toppings and any special instructions on the actual order. And then last we talked about an automated phone menu, routing delivery orders to one line and pickup orders to a different line. So we think about, okay, how would we like to start this? We know that through quality improvement we really want to start small, so we're going to ask one phone rep for 1 hour to trial these ideas. We're going to identify who's going to collect our data, and we're going to identify what our prediction is. So in this case, we really think that by standardizing the way we do things, we will get more accurate orders to the people that need to deliver the pizzas. So the whole process will run a little bit smoother. To identify if the change is successful, we really want to build in the opportunity to get rapid feedback. At the end of that hour, we'll know how well it worked. We will not have done anything other than pilot test the scripts, which we could easily change. We will not have ordered a whole bunch of paper order forms at this point, or if we're electronic in this case, we will not have modified our entire database for this test. We'll have a good idea of what works, what order the elements need to go in, how long it takes to deliver this over the phone. So we'll know at the end of that hour if this is something we want to pursue. And so ultimately, we want to make sure that our results improve. So what happened? So in the spirit of time, I'll let you know that this was a successful intervention. Our staff were on board. The person testing this with the phones really felt that this was easy to do. They felt the order was ensuring consistency for the people making the pizzas, and that the script was very easy to follow when taking orders. So from that, when we looked at our data and we talked to everybody, our options were to think about if we wanted to continue to do this again, or if we wanted to modify it. And so in this case, our improvement jumped up to 72% for the month of February, and we implemented this as a standard way of collecting our orders in. So next we wanted to focus on getting to the delivery location. So this was our focused effort in March. We had identified, again, the challenge of making sure our drivers could get from one step to the other step. So in February, we really focused on order accuracy, and we decided to print up, once we had tested multiple times, the delivery of our script over the phone. We got an order form that everybody seemed to work well with, and that went well. We got our rate up to 72%, so now it's time for the next step of the process. We don't want to do both of these at the same time because we really want to make sure there's time for the staff to focus and give us feedback. So in March, we decided to look at the delivery location. Our ideas for this were standardizing the script to collect information from the customer. So now, again, in the script, we want to make sure that we clarify and get enough information for our drivers to get that order correctly the first time to the right location. So we're going to clarify if it's an apartment, a house, or a business. We're going to collect a phone number for follow-up so that way if our driver needs to contact en route, we can. And we're going to provide maps or GPSs for drivers to, again, test that out and see how well it goes. So this also ended up being a successful plan. Note that in both of these cases, we did not necessarily need to hire more staff. We just had to think about how the process could be done differently. So from here, when we think about how things went, we really want to look at our data. And so you can see in January, which was our baseline, we were at 65%. Our test in February, which we've annotated on our run chart with our order entry changes, shows that we got up to 72% and that we did get more orders. We went from 98 orders in January to 120 orders in February. So a lot of information can be portrayed on one diagram here, in this case a run chart. In March, we tested our delivery changes. and we had 110 orders, and we got up to 80%. So it shows we're on the right path. And it shows, again, it gives us the opportunity to think about, are we getting our intended results as we go along? So when you get to the point that you're thinking about your actions, you can talk about if you want to adapt and modify the plan and test it again. If you want to adopt the plan, you've received the intended results after testing in a variety of situations, in which case both of these led to an adoption. Or if we decide that these are what we call fabulous failures and we never ever want to do this again and we want to abandon it. Those are great learning opportunities also. And because minimal resources are impacted, because it was a small scale, we also can generate buy-in across the staff because it shows that we're listening to them. We've tested it. If it doesn't yield the ideas that we want, we have a lot of opportunities to go from there. So with March, we showed that these delivery changes were valuable, and it gave us, again, some other ideas as to what else we could do. Maybe we would go as far as assigning zones to the drivers so they could become familiar with neighborhoods. We also have a lot of other ideas as to what we can do with our high-level process map. So even though the high-level process map has not changed, we now have a new perspective on each one of the individual steps. So we'll want to go back and look at our process map and update it to include the data based on our experiences if anything needs to be changed. So for example, even though we didn't specifically change how we received the order, we did test some interventions that shows we used a script in an order form. Secondly, even though we didn't focus on the ingredients, later changes that we tested in April showed us that we had a huge opportunity for placing the order of ingredients in a certain way, so that way more frequently used ingredients could be closer and in bigger buckets or bins, so to speak, to the people that were making the pizzas, and less frequent ingredients didn't need to take up as much space or be as readily available. Similarly, we talked about how the assembly of the order would be. And so again, where are our pizza boxes located? How many pizza boxes do we need to have on hand and ready to go to meet our peak hours? And then ultimately, when it came to delivering the order, we used the use of travel aids. So again, just making sure that we think about how all of these things impact our process. And so updating our process map to include data based on our experience will help this become a training tool for new staff and change the behavior, so that this will become the new normal default process. And if someone is mentoring a new employee, they will go by this diagram and it becomes part of their daily work. So let's look at other examples. This can be considered a process map, and it's a more detailed process map on how data collected during the home visit can be used by home visitors to generate family outcomes and tracked as a system to identify opportunities for improvement. So very simply, it starts over in the top left and outlines how elements from the home visit become quality indicator metrics. So there's tools that are used to prepare for each home visit. The home visit takes place. Paperwork is collected over in the right corner. That paperwork is entered into the database timely and accurately. Then this allows the home visitor to think about the outcomes and the scores that were associated with the data that they collected and use this information in addition to the curriculum being used to plan her next home visit. And then ultimately develop a way to give that feedback back to the family for age-based milestones that were achieved along this developmental period, and then turn that into data that can be reported back to the agencies, either at the level of family at the home visit or overall at the agency level to show that things were achieved, any particular of the quality indicators, how that looked. So again, taking that information and converting it into a visual diagram can help get everybody on the same page. This example is called a Swiveling Process Map, and it's actually been created in Visio, which is a software application that Microsoft manages. So it depicts the referral process across care settings. So over on the left, you'll see the different roles listed, from home visitor, home visiting agency, OB provider, nurse, registration staff, up to patient at the top. And what this allows us to do is, again, use the standardized symbols of a flowchart, but tracks the contributions of each role across time. So it also includes multiple decision points which can determine the path of the outcome. So again, in this case, we're monitoring how a patient comes into her prenatal visit at her OB provider and how she can be referred to a home visiting program. In this example, we're looking at how depression screening can be done using PowerPoint. So again, very simply, we're looking at the state level, how we can identify the process used at one of our local implementing sites. In the first agency, which is outlined in blue, there's one screening tool that's used postpartum when the baby is 10 weeks old. It's pretty high level as to how the information is collected, but differs in comparison to Agency 2, which administers a different inventory at a different point in time in their program. So both enter their data into our statewide system, which in turn is incorporated into reports that will trigger actions at multiple levels. So when we're thinking about how this looks at the state level, we really want to make sure that we can identify how each model's resources impact the process. And that way we can really outline the process and how it goes from point A to point B and have the knowledge of where data comes from and the practices that have differences and understanding where our opportunities lie to either standardize, develop best practices, or look for improvement opportunities. So high-level interventions may be needed that cross over all processes, so triggers that are needed to complete the tool can be generically used in both of these process examples for Agency 1 and Agency 2. Accurate and timely data entry into the statewide database is a very similar process that comes in at the first purple box over on the left towards the bottom of the screen. And then smaller scale interventions may be required for the specific site results. So at that point, we would drill down into specific areas of the process to understand what happens. But again, in this example, we've just used PowerPoint to illustrate two different agencies and how that data is entered into the statewide database. Then following the boxes along the bottom, how the reports are generated, and they're reported back to the statewide and individual agency and county rates. They're distributed back to the project managers. The CQI committee reviews the results and discusses where to go next for improvement opportunities. And then these steps and these improvement opportunities are identified for each of the participants. So again, it doesn't necessarily stop here when you think about the full process, but in our example, this is where we would stop and think about what next. So in summary, I want to leave you with some high-level thoughts. Our goal with improvement efforts and creating processes that work is to make it easy to do the right thing. I'm sure many of you in this day and age are familiar with Google Maps and driving directions, whether it be in your GPS or using it on your computer. So driving and getting directions can be an example of getting a process map that will help you get from point A to point B. And in this case, we're really at a higher level, but we inputted the data into Google, and we are going from Denver, Colorado to Japan. Google's made it very easy for us to do the right thing. They've provided a suggested route. They've highlighted the distance and the time. They've told us that this route has toll roads and included a great map over there on the right that tells us exactly where we're starting at point A and how we're going to get to point B. Next, in order to have successful improvement work, minimizing steps helps us find the most efficient way to get something done and decreases the chances for failure. So we really want to think about how we can maximize our opportunities. And so when we drill down into our driving directions, we find that Google, again, is extremely helpful and provides us turn-by-turn indicators on the left side here in the gray. You can see which direction the road is going to take at step 21 when we take exit 14 for Washington 520 East towards Richmond. Then the next step 22, we know we're going to go a little bit, bear to the left a little bit, and go on a partial toll road. So this gives us great information and mileage information. And they've, again, given us a warning where the toll roads will impact our routes. Next, in our improvement work, we really want to think about how we can build redundancy into the system and protect against a single component failure. So just to make sure that we've considered everything, we want to add an additional layer of detail to our directions by zooming our map on the right to a street level view. So now as we're driving, we're going to have a good idea of what direction the road will take us and pictures of what the intersection will look like. I mean, we'll know that we're there when we see the stop sign with the telephone poles and the street markers. So these are great planning tools to help us be successful. However, if we don't think about getting everyone's perspective into the big picture to build on the details, one step can alter our entire outcome. And on this example, I want to highlight step number 28. So here we are, we're going from Colorado to Japan, and everything is smooth sailing up until 28 when it specifically says, sail across the Pacific Ocean for 2,756 miles. So our final thoughts are to have a clear identification of the process owners and the steps to success. Google made it seem very easy to get from point A to point B, but they never ever mentioned that we'd need a boat or a plane or anything to go across the ocean in the middle. We should have realized that from the initial diagram when it showed the ocean in the middle, and they didn't talk to us about that. But they gave us enough data to, again, trust in the process. It's just, again, we have to think about how the process steps are going to lead us to success. So we want to also make sure that we analyze the process outcomes, not just the final goal. Process really does matter. And ultimately, we want to be transparent. We are learning our way into a new system, so failures and learning opportunities are to be expected. Again, we do it right the majority of the time when we think about these things, so they're not isolated incidences. We really want to think about how we can build the process to make sure that we're doing what we intend to do consistently each time and every time. So in closing, I will leave you with the quote that we started out with. If you can't describe your work as a process, you don't know what you're doing. And Susan, I will turn it back over to you for questions.
Thank you, Julie, for such a nice presentation. And telephone lines will now be open for the question and discussion portion of the webinar. You may unmute your line by pressing 60# to ask a question. After asking your question, please remute your line by pressing 61#. You may also submit a question through the Q&A feature of the live meeting screen. And we did have a couple of questions come in. One of them, Julie, was, can you talk a little bit more about how the drivers were determined?
Sure. In this case, when we looked at our data, and let me get us back to that slide that we were looking at. This may take us a few minutes. When we look at the drivers for what we're trying to improve, our data will help guide us to figure out what our long-term objectives are and what will yield us the most improvement. So our first step was to look at our process failures, and hopefully everyone can see on the screen here that when we collected our baseline data, the reasons that we failed in delivering the pizza were focused on our number one issue was that the driver was lost with 37 incidences. We had the wrong address 23 times, and then we had the wrong order 17 times. So again, thinking about our drivers and where we can go next, we really want to think about how we can identify the tests. So in this case, in order to deliver our pizzas consistently, we know that we had to hit those big issues where our process was failing us. Additionally, we want to make sure that we think about other things that may impact it. However, we were not addressing those in our improvement activities at this point. But specifically, the drivers are going to help you think about what needs to happen in order to accomplish our aim. So in this case, our drivers were very similar to our process map in that we had to receive the order accurately. We had to make sure we had the right ingredients and assemble the order and then deliver the order. So sometimes they come very close with what our process looks like. However, the easiest way to think about when you're thinking about your improvement and how you'll drive the results of your aim are the drivers will really represent what you're trying to do, what needs to happen in order to achieve your aim. And then how you achieve your aim gives you your test of changes or your interventions, so to speak. So when we were thinking about the pizza delivery model example, we knew that by implementing a GPS or potentially identifying neighborhoods that our drivers would go to would help us with two of our key data points that showed us that we had opportunities in drivers to make an improvement in the areas of awareness and location and getting the pizzas to the customers. So when we think about where we can go with that next, we pilot tested the intervention for the GPS, linked it to our driver of change, which was making sure, again, that we had clear directions, clear idea where we were going, and linked it specifically back to our aim, which was that we wanted to get our orders out within 30% of the time.
Thank you, Julie. Another question regarding small-scale testing. For grantees that are relatively small and may only have a couple of sites or only a handful of home visitors, would they still be able to implement a PDSA cycle?
Sure. I think anybody really can do a PDSA cycle. All it takes is the opportunity to test something out and learn from it. In a smaller site, you may not have as many opportunities as a larger site would have. So, for example, if we are trying to test an intervention that's focused on breastfeeding, we would need a mom that had just delivered her baby that was interested in initiating. So in a larger site with multiple home visitors, we would have more opportunities to test our ideas. However, if we're looking to develop a resource, the idea of starting small really starts with one family. So if we wanted to give an idea of how we could help that mom initiate and sustain breastfeeding, we really need one family to bounce that idea off of and get their feedback. And then at the next home visit, see if it's still working and see if, again, our same intervention or idea or resource yields the same impact. Once we test it with one family and we get a favorable result, we'd like to test it again. And so by testing small, we can get that trial and error. If we're trying to, for example, complete a new inventory, there's multiple ways within the home visit that it can be introduced. And so you may find, and same with our breastfeeding resource example, you may find that sometimes it works better with certain families to introduce it at the beginning of the visit, and other times it makes sense to introduce it at the end of the visit, and other times it may make sense to introduce it with a specific topic that occurs at a specific visit. So the size of the agencies may limit the opportunities to test things, but each home visit and each family presents an opportunity in itself to get feedback on how things will go. So absolutely, I think anybody can do PDSA cycles. I think anybody can get the feedback and get ideas as to what happens. If for some reason it's not a successful intervention, then it just gives you the opportunity to figure out why. Was it the timing? Was it the actual resource? Was it the presentation? Was it the family was not receptive for whatever reason? It didn't match their needs. It wasn't what they were looking for. You know, there's all different reasons as to why things don't work. So it really gives you the opportunity to think about it and then test it again.
Thank you. Now let's see if we have any questions on the phone lines. Remember, you can unmute your line by pressing 60# and then remute it by pressing 61#.
Hi, this is Mary Beth in Virginia. Can I ask a question?
Sure. Hi, Mary Beth.
Hi. This is really, I guess, for you guys or for the other listeners. I'm interested to know how media sites are using process maps in their CQI work. Because we're starting to think about doing that with our sites, and just to kind of get an idea of how others are using this tool.
So this is Julie. I'll give you my experience through the technical assistance, and then I'll turn it over to Susan and everyone else on the phone to give their experience. We have encouraged sites to think about, for example, in the depression screening model, how the data is collected. And so maybe thinking about how many sites are reporting into the state and on a specific measure. So starting small, so for example, using depression screening, or maybe it's a different measure. Just to, again, get your feet wet in understanding the processes, especially if you have different models that you're looking at. So how HFA does it may be a little different than how NFP does it, considering the databases on how all of that data gets into the system. So again, becoming familiar with the timing of the collection, the data entry protocol into the system, and then how that will ultimately look when you go to report it at a statewide level. So if you're combining models, if you're combining sites, if you're combining different sizes or experiences or populations, you know, maybe you have Spanish-speaking populations or other languages. So different dynamics will impact your ultimate results. So we've encouraged states to think about how they could develop a process map that will help highlight some of these unique situations to ultimately drive that data collection and reporting experience when they run that data to show what their result is. Additionally, we've encouraged states to take it one step further to think about, now that you've collected this data, what does your reporting mechanism look like? So there's a lot of data that can be reported back to each one of the sites and the agencies at a state level, at a site level, at a home visitor level, at a family level. There's 6 benchmarks. There's multiple constructs within those benchmarks. So very easily you can create volumes of data going back. So thinking about what format that report will be fed back to the sites, and then what the sites are supposed to do with it is another great opportunity for a process map. So thinking about the format of the report, starting small to come up with a format that will work with one indicator with one site. Then when you run the data with an additional site, helps build that familiarity and that comfort in using data and understanding what it replicates and what it shows. Additionally then, thinking about who that's supposed to go to at each one of those sites and identifying what role it might be or what individual it might be and what they're supposed to do next with it. I mean, how great would it be to come in and get kind of a diagram that says, when you receive this report, your next 3 actions are X, Y, and Z. So whether that is reviewing it for completeness, reviewing it against previous performance, reviewing it against state performance, what actions are supposed to take place at the local level, and then ultimately identifying improvement opportunities from that. When you think about how many different opportunities may be happening and how many project improvements might be going on simultaneously, what is that feedback loop back to the state? So that way you can really capture those ideas and identify what's working well and what needs improvements, or again, having that dialogue across different sites to drive the sharing of ideas. So in our recommendations when we've done some of the technical assistance are to start with that, maybe picking one indicator and just kind of outlining it with one agency, then add another agency or another site in another model, and just really kind of getting the lay of the land to become familiar with one indicator. And then similarly, thinking about that reporting loop. Many times sites are not aware that when they get data, they may have to take action on it. So again, identifying a format that works really well, and then you can replicate it across indicators so that it can be quickly identified where the areas of opportunity are. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, great. And Susan, I don't know if you or anyone else on the phones have any other ideas as to what's been done.
No, I think you said it just right, and I think just adding that grantees are so diverse that each process map is unique and reflects the flow of data and activities throughout their particular system. And as Julie highlighted in her presentation, that by breaking it down, by breaking all those processes down into pieces, the program can reflect on what is working, how the process might be made more efficient. Any other questions?
Susan, it looks like there's one more in the Q&A.
Julie, here's the question. If you can share more insight into what you mean by unnecessary feedback loops.
So an unnecessary feedback loop might be an example of kind of an extra few steps that are built into the process just to check and make sure something has happened, but don't necessarily add value to the entire process or to the outcome. So this really comes into play a lot of times when we're looking to see, if data collection has been done timely, or if somebody else enters the data. So thinking about your process and what you're trying to accomplish and thinking about how many steps it takes to accomplish that, you may find that there's more efficient ways to get, if your home visitors are doing things on paper, to get the updated paper copies to them, entered into the system, and then feedback back out to how they can make a difference with the home visit at the next home visit cycle by using different curriculum or different resources. So if you find that there's extra steps in there or extra pieces that have been done just because they've always been done that way, they might yield opportunities to either standardize the process, think about what role those extra steps might make sense and whose position might be best utilized to collect that information. I think an example of this could be kind of a central coordination example, that if you have multiple entry points to where phone calls and referrals can come into a system for home visiting, you may want to think about how many steps and how many people it takes to get that referral from the initial phone call to the actual person who will be delivering the home visit. So thinking about if there's an unnecessary step in it for paper to be followed up on, or unnecessary step for transfers, whereas one caller may be able to, again, utilize a script and answer questions very easily. But thinking about it, again, it may not be an unnecessary feedback loop, but it may just be extra steps that are in there. The loops come in play when you're constantly cycling through to see if something has been done, and it kind of adds that extra waste or delay in the process that may not be valuable. So what is the reason for each one of the steps? Are they being done as they need to be done? And could they be done either by a different person, combined in a different step, or, using technology today? If you're using paper, can you use a database? Can you use a tablet? Can you do it real time as opposed to putting that delay in where someone copies the paper, makes sure they have the paper in the home visit, comes back, someone needs to data enter it. So thinking about all of those things, each process may yield different ways that there's these extra steps in it. And some processes may be as efficient as they can be, and at that point it's more of just an awareness to replicate it over and over and over again to get the yielded results. But usually it's a combination of two things. One is that the process is not actually being implemented as it's intended, and so you'll find that when you really outline all the process steps and get the right people at the table to say exactly what they do in their role. Because many times people are only familiar with their role. They're not sure about the big picture to get from A to B. They may not realize that they're doing something that somebody else then double checks. Or they may not realize that this field is really used in a certain way. So that's usually the first step for improvement, is to really kind of lay it all out and think about what you're trying to accomplish with each one of the steps. And then the second piece of improvement is actually executing that process and implementing it. So are you doing it when you observe the process as you wrote it down? Are there variations? Are there more variations that happen than the process actually happens? And thinking about how those impact the outcome. So again, when you start off with the very basic process map, a high-level diagram of 4 to 7 steps, you're not going to capture everything, but you'll capture enough to kind of guide you to that next step. So for example, for our order entry piece, there could be a whole nother process behind that, and there is. And it really tracks how the phone script is used and how then that information is recorded on the order form and how that information then is translated and received by the person making the pizza. It's very similar to how a referral is generated into the system, how your program is presented to the eligible population consistently, how the home visits are taken place and people are engaged in the home visits, how a home visitor prepares for those home visits, and then ultimately how all of that data is transformed at the family level, the agency level, and now ultimately at the state level to make a difference in the benchmarks. That's a great question because, again, I think when you start to drill down into how things actually occur, there's a balance of what's actually happening and what we intend to happen. And so, again, quality improvement gives us that non-punitive way to be an investigator into figuring out what we'd like to happen consistently and why it's not happening.
Any other questions? If not, thank you all for participating in the process mapping webinar. And just a reminder that the audio and the slides will be available after the webinar. They'll be posted on the DOHVE website. And we will try to distribute the slides through the listserv as well. So thank you all for participating.